We were having a normal family dinner, the kind we'd had 100 times before. But under the table, my 16-year-old daughter slipped a folded napkin into my hand. I opened it in my lap. 2 words were written in shaky handwriting: "Call 911." My brother-in-law was sitting right across from me, smiling, and I had absolutely no idea what danger we were in. Let me back up and explain how we got to that moment, because nothing about that evening started out wrong. In fact, it started with the best of intentions. It was a Sunday in late October, and I'd spent most of the afternoon in the kitchen preparing a roast chicken dinner. The smell of herbs and garlic filled our house. My husband James had set the table with our good dishes, the ones we only used for special occasions. Our daughter Emily was upstairs doing homework, and everything felt perfectly normal. We were expecting James's brother Mark for dinner. This was supposed to be a fresh start for him, a chance for our family to show support and love. Mark had always been what people politely called the black sheep of the family. Growing up, he'd been the charming younger brother, the one who could talk his way out of anything. While James went to college and became an accountant, Mark bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. He'd started a t-shirt business that failed. He'd tried selling timeshares in Florida. He'd invested in a friend's restaurant that went bankrupt within 6 months. Every few years, he'd show up at our door with a new plan and a request for money. James always helped him. That's the kind of man my husband is. He believes in family. He believes in second chances. 6 months ago, we got the news that Mark had been arrested. The story he told us was that he'd been caught up in a financial fraud case. He said he'd been working for a real estate company that turned out to be running a scheme. According to Mark, he was just a low-level employee who got caught in the net when the FBI came calling. He said he'd pleaded guilty to a minor charge to avoid a lengthy trial and got sentenced to 6 months in a minimum security facility. James was heartbroken. I was skeptical, but I kept my doubts to myself. Mark had a way of spinning stories that made him always sound like the victim of circumstances, rather than the cause of his own problems. When Mark called last week to say he'd been released and was looking to rebuild his life, James immediately invited him to dinner. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I understood. This was James's brother. This was family. So I put on a smile and prepared a nice meal. I told myself that maybe this time would be different. Maybe the experience of being in jail, even for a short time, had changed him. Maybe he really was ready to turn his life around. Emily had always been different when it came to her Uncle Mark. Even as a little girl, she'd hide behind my legs when he visited. When she got older and I asked her why she didn't like him, she couldn't quite explain it. She just said he made her feel weird. She said his smile didn't match his eyes. She said he looked at people like he was always calculating something. I dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination, but the feeling never went away for her. As she became a teenager, she simply avoided him. When we told her he was coming for dinner, she'd asked if she could eat in her room. James said no. He said this was a family dinner, and she needed to be there to support her uncle. Mark arrived at 6 o'clock exactly. He was wearing new clothes, dark jeans, and a button-down shirt. His hair was cut short and he'd shaved. He looked good. He looked like someone trying to make a fresh start. He hugged James, shook my hand, and complimented the smell of dinner. He brought a bottle of wine, which I thought was a nice gesture. Everything seemed fine. Everything seemed like it was going to be okay. We all sat down at the dining room table. James carved the chicken while I brought out the roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes. Mark talked about his plans. He said he was going to stay with a friend across town for a while. He said he had some job interviews lined up. He said he'd learned his lesson and was ready to be a productive member of society. James beamed at him, so proud of his brother's apparent transformation. I wanted to believe it too. I really did. But Emily was quiet. She sat in her usual chair, directly across from Mark and next to me. She'd taken small portions of food and was pushing them around her plate with her fork. She wasn't eating. She wasn't participating in the conversation. She just stared down at her plate with this tight expression on her face. I leaned over once and whispered, asking if she was feeling okay. She nodded quickly but didn't look at me. Mark was telling a story about someone he'd met while he was away. He called it meeting people while away, never saying the word prison or jail. He was describing this guy who taught him about investing in cryptocurrency. The way he told it was funny and charming. James was laughing. Even I found myself smiling a bit. Mark had always been a good storyteller. He had this way of drawing people in, of making you want to like him. That was his gift, and probably also his curse. He could charm his way into and out of almost anything. That's when I felt it. Emily's hand reaching under the table, pressing something into my palm. At first, I thought maybe she was passing me her napkin, that she'd spilled something and was embarrassed. I took it without looking and placed it in my lap while keeping my eyes on Mark, who was still talking. I opened the napkin casually, expecting to see a stain or maybe a teenage note complaining about how boring dinner was. Instead, I saw 3 words written in blue ink in my daughter's handwriting. The letters were shaky and pressed hard into the paper. Call 911. Don't let him see. My heart stopped. Actually stopped for a second. I felt this wave of ice-cold fear wash over my entire body. My hands started shaking. I kept my face frozen in what I hoped was a neutral expression. But inside, I was panicking. What did this mean? Was Emily playing some kind of prank? Was this teenage drama? But even as those thoughts flickered through my mind, I knew they weren't true. Emily wasn't dramatic. She wasn't the type to joke about something like this. And the way she'd written the words with such urgency and fear told me this was real. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She was still staring at her plate, but her jaw was clenched tight. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her fork. Very slowly, so slowly that no one else would notice, she turned her head just a fraction toward me. Our eyes met for half a second. In that brief moment, I saw pure terror. I saw my daughter silently begging me to believe her, to trust her, to do something. Then she looked away again. My mind was racing. I needed to stay calm. I needed to figure out what to do. I couldn't just jump up and run. If Emily said not to let Mark see, then there was a reason. I had to trust her. Every instinct I had as a mother was screaming at me to trust my daughter. Something was very, very wrong. Mark was still talking. James was still smiling. The candles on the table flickered. The clock on the wall ticked. Everything looked so normal, so safe. But underneath that surface, something terrible was happening. I just didn't know what yet. I had to get away from the table. I had to call for help. But I needed an excuse. Something that wouldn't raise suspicion. I took a slow breath and put my hand to my forehead. I let my face scrunch up a little like I was in pain. Then I interrupted Mark mid-sentence. "Sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I'm getting a terrible headache all of a sudden. I think I need to go lie down for a minute." James immediately looked concerned. He started to stand up. "Are you okay? Do you need me to get you something?" No, I said quickly. "I just need some aspirin and a few minutes in the dark. You all keep eating. I'll be fine." Mark was watching me. His expression hadn't changed. He was still smiling, but there was something in his eyes now. Something sharp and alert. "Can I help?" he offered. "I know where the medicine cabinet is." "That's okay," I said, forcing myself to smile back at him. "I know you haven't seen James in a while. You two catch up." "Emily, honey, will you help me upstairs?" Emily started to push back her chair, but Mark spoke again. "Actually, I was hoping Emily could help me understand how to use my new phone after dinner. I'm pretty hopeless with technology. Maybe your mom just needs a few minutes alone? Sometimes that helps with migraines, right?" He was blocking me from taking Emily with me. The realization made my stomach turn. James nodded in agreement. Mark's right. You should rest in peace and quiet. We'll keep the noise down. I didn't have a choice. I stood up, my legs feeling shaky beneath me. I avoided looking at Emily because I was afraid I might break down. I walked out of the dining room, through the living room, and up the stairs to our bedroom. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every step felt like it took forever. Once I was in the bedroom, I closed the door and locked it. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn the little lock on the doorknob. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? I need help, I whispered. My voice was shaking. Please, I need police at my house right now. Ma'am, can you speak up? What's happening? I can't speak loudly, I said, trying to keep my voice as quiet as possible while still being heard. My brother-in-law is here. My daughter passed me a note telling me to call 911. I don't know what's happening, but she's terrified. Please send someone. Is anyone injured? The dispatcher asked. No, not yet. But please hurry. My daughter wouldn't have done this unless something was seriously wrong. The dispatcher asked for my address. I gave it to her. She asked me where I was in the house. I told her I was locked in my bedroom on the second floor. She asked where my daughter was. I told her she was downstairs in the dining room with my husband and my brother-in-law. The dispatcher told me she was sending officers immediately. She told me to stay on the line. She told me to stay calm and stay where I was. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, phone pressed to my ear, and listened. Downstairs, I could hear the murmur of voices. I couldn't make out words, but the conversation seemed to be continuing. Maybe everything was okay. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Emily had misunderstood something. But then I remembered the look in her eyes, and I knew I wasn't wrong. The dispatcher was asking me questions. How long had my brother-in-law been in my home? Did he have any weapons that I knew of? Had he made any threats? I answered as best I could, but I realized I didn't have answers. I didn't know why Emily was scared. I didn't know what the threat was. I just knew my daughter had asked for help, and that was enough. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy footsteps, coming up slowly. I stopped breathing. The dispatcher was asking me something, but I couldn't hear her over the sound of blood rushing in my ears. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They walked down the hallway. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I stared at the door, frozen. For a moment, there was just silence. Then, the doorknob turned. The door didn't open because it was locked, but I watched the knob twist back and forth as someone tried it. Then came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Sarah, came Mark's voice from the other side. It was low and quiet. Sarah, I know you're in there. I know what you did. My mouth went dry. The dispatcher was saying something urgent in my ear. Mom? Ma'am, are you there? Talk to me. He's outside my door, I whispered. Do not open the door, the dispatcher said firmly. Officers are 3 minutes away. Do not open that door. I wasn't planning to. I backed away from the door until my legs hit the bed. I sat down hard, my eyes never leaving the doorknob. Mark spoke again. His voice was different now. The charm was completely gone. You called the cops, didn't you? That's what you're doing up here. You called the fucking cops. I didn't answer. I couldn't have spoken if I'd wanted to. My throat felt closed. You really shouldn't have done that, Sarah. Mark's voice was getting. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you understand what's going to happen now? The doorknob rattled again, harder this time. Then there was a thud. He was putting his shoulder against the door. The wood creaked. The door was solid, but the frame was old. If he really wanted to break through, he probably could. Where are James and Emily? I managed to choke out. They're fine, Mark said. They're downstairs. They're confused, but they're fine. Your daughter is a smart little bitch. I'll give her that. My stomach lurched at the way he said it. What had Emily discovered? How had she known? The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent in my ear. Mom, I need you to stay quiet now. Don't engage with him. Officers are turning onto your street right now. They'll be there in less than a minute. Another thud against the door. Harder this time. The frame cracked a little. I could see the wood splintering near the lock. Mark was really trying to break in now. All pretense was gone. You want to know something funny, Sarah? Mark's voice was almost casual now, which made it even more terrifying. I wasn't even planning to hurt anyone. I just needed some money. I just needed enough cash to get out of state. Your husband, my dear brother, was going to give it to me. He doesn't know it yet, but he was going to hand over whatever I asked for, because that's what James does. He's a good guy. He's a sucker for family. Another hit to the door. The crack in the frame grew larger. I could see part of the hallway through the gap now. But then your kid had to go snooping, Mark continued. She found the paper I dropped. Didn't even realize I'd lost it until she was staring at me across the table with those wide eyes. I could see it on her face. She knew. Smart kid. Stupid. But smart. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Emily had found something? Some kind of paper? But what really pisses me off? Mark said. His voice was rising now, getting louder and angrier. I did my time. I served my sentence. It's not my fault some idiot processed the wrong paperwork. I shouldn't even be wanted right now. This is all a mistake. His words were sinking in. Wrong paperwork. He was wanted. There was a warrant. This wasn't about what he'd told us. He'd lied about everything. Another massive hit to the door. The wood around the lock fully splintered. The door burst open, slamming against the wall. Mark stood in the doorway. His face was red. His eyes were wild. He looked like a completely different person from the charming man who'd arrived with a bottle of wine. For a frozen second, we just stared at each other. I was sitting on the bed, phone in hand. He was breathing hard, his fists clenched at his sides. Then I heard the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life. Sirens, close, right outside. Mark heard them too. His head snapped toward the window. His expression changed from rage to panic. He looked back at me with pure hatred on his face. You stupid bitch, he said. You just ruined everything. Then he turned and ran. I heard him thundering down the stairs. I heard shouting, James's voice confused and scared, Emily screaming, more shouting, then a crash, glass breaking, more yelling, heavy footsteps running through the house. The dispatcher was shouting in my ear, Ma'am, officers are entering your home now. Stay where you are. I couldn't stay. My daughter was down there. I dropped the phone on the bed and ran out of the bedroom. I got to the top of the stairs and looked down into chaos. The front door was wide open. 2 police officers had Mark on the ground in the entryway. They were putting handcuffs on him while he thrashed and screamed. James was standing in the living room doorway, his face completely white with shock. And Emily was pressed against the wall near the dining room, tears streaming down her face. I ran down the stairs so fast I almost fell. I pushed past the officers and went straight to my daughter. I pulled her into my arms and held her tight. She was sobbing, her whole body shaking. I was crying too. We stood there holding each other while the police secured Mark and read him his rights. Another officer, a woman with kind eyes, came over to us. She put a gentle hand on my shoulder. Everyone's safe now, she said. You did the right thing by calling. Can you tell me what happened? I started to answer, but I realized I still didn't know the full story. I looked at Emily. She was still crying, her face buried in my shoulder. Honey, I said softly. Can you tell us what you found? How did you know? Emily pulled back from me. Her face was blotchy and red. Her eyes were swollen. She wiped her nose on her sleeve and took a shaky breath. When he went to the bathroom before dinner, she said, her voice hoarse. He had something in his pocket. When he stood up, it fell out. It was folded up. I picked it up. She reached into her own pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. She handed it to the police officer. The officer unfolded it and read it, her expression growing serious. She looked at her partner, who was standing with Mark, and nodded. "It's a prison release form," the officer explained to me. But when Emily looked closer at the details, she must have noticed something was wrong. Emily nodded. The dates didn't match what he told us, and the charges listed weren't fraud. They were aggravated assault. So I looked up his inmate number on my phone while you were all talking. There's a warrant out for him. He wasn't supposed to be released yet. There was a clerical error, and when they realized it, they issued a warrant for his immediate return. But he'd already disappeared. I stared at my daughter. She'd done all of that research in the span of maybe 10 minutes while sitting at the dinner table. While Mark was talking and charming her father, she'd been quietly uncovering the truth, and she'd been smart enough to know that confronting him directly would be dangerous. She'd been brave enough to warn me without giving anything away. The officer was nodding, impressed. That was incredibly smart thinking. You may have prevented a very dangerous situation from getting worse. He came here for money, didn't he? I think so, Emily said quietly. When I looked at him after I found out, he saw it on my face. I tried to hide it, but I couldn't. I knew he knew that I knew. I was so scared. James finally moved. He walked over to us, looking like he might be sick. His brother was still on the ground, now silent, staring at the floor. I don't understand, James said. Mark, what is she talking about? You said you were in for fraud. You said it was a mistake. Mark didn't look up. He didn't answer. One of the officers pulled him to his feet and started walking him toward the door. James reached out like he was going to stop them. Wait, he said. There has to be some explanation. Mark, tell them this is wrong. The female officer gently touched James's arm. Sir, we have an active warrant for his arrest. He was released from prison by mistake 3 weeks ago. The charges are serious. Aggravated assault against another inmate. He's considered dangerous. That last word hit James like a punch. Dangerous. His brother. The person he'd been trying to help. The person he'd invited into our home around our daughter. James looked at me, then at Emily, then back at Mark. I watched my husband's face go through about a dozen emotions in the span of seconds. Confusion, denial, horror, betrayal, grief. Mark was taken out to the police car. More officers had arrived. Our quiet street was lit up with red and blue lights. Neighbors were coming out of their houses to see what was happening. The whole scene felt surreal, like we were watching it happen to someone else. The officers needed statements from all of us. They separated us and talked to each of us individually. I sat on the couch with one officer and told her everything I could remember. The note, the call, Mark breaking into my bedroom. Emily sat at the dining room table with another officer, her voice quiet but steady, as she explained how she'd found the paper and what she'd discovered. James stood in the kitchen, looking lost, while a third officer asked him questions about his brother's recent contact with the family. It took over an hour for them to get all the information they needed. During that time, I learned more details. Mark hadn't just made a mistake. He'd deliberately come to our house because he knew James would help him. His plan had been to get money, probably a lot of it, and then disappear before the authorities caught up with him. The officer said that if Emily hadn't discovered the truth when she did, the situation could have turned into a hostage scenario. Mark had nothing to lose. He was looking at serious time for the original assault, plus additional charges for evading arrest. He would have done whatever it took to get away. The assault he'd committed in prison had been brutal. He'd attacked a cellmate with a homemade weapon over some dispute. The victim had needed surgery. Mark had been awaiting transfer to a higher security facility when the clerical error resulted in his release. He'd walked out the front door of the prison and vanished until tonight. When the officers finally left, it was almost midnight. The house was a disaster. The front door frame was damaged where they'd burst in. My bedroom door was broken. There was broken glass in the entryway from a vase that had gotten knocked over during the struggle. But none of that mattered. We were safe. That was all that mattered. James sat on the couch with his head in his hands. He hadn't said much since the police left. I sat down next to him and put my hand on his back. He was crying quietly, his shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I brought him here. I put you both in danger. I should have known. I should have seen it." "You couldn't have known," I said. "He lied to you. He's been lying to you your whole life." "But Emily knew," James said. "Our 16-year-old daughter knew he was dangerous and I didn't. I've been making excuses for him for years. How many times did she tell us she didn't feel comfortable around him? And I made her sit at the dinner table with him tonight. I made her. His guilt was overwhelming him. I understood it. I felt it too. As parents, we're supposed to protect our children. We're supposed to keep them safe. Tonight, we'd failed at that in a fundamental way. We'd invited danger into our home because of family loyalty and misplaced trust." Emily came and sat on James's other side. She leaned against him. "It's okay, Dad," she said quietly. "You didn't know. I almost didn't know. If he hadn't dropped that paper, I wouldn't have found out either." "You saved us," James said, turning to look at her. "You were so brave. I'm so proud of you and so sorry all at once." The three of us sat together for a long time, not saying much. The house felt different now. It felt violated. The sense of safety that had existed just hours ago was gone. We all felt it. This place where we'd shared thousands of meals and countless memories had been turned into a crime scene. It would take time to feel normal here again. Eventually, Emily went up to bed. I tucked her in like I used to when she was little. She asked if she could sleep with her light on. I said, of course. I sat on the edge of her bed for a while, just watching her. She looked so young lying there, too young to have had to deal with what she dealt with tonight. But she'd handled it with a level of maturity and intelligence that amazed me. Before I left her room, she grabbed my hand. "Mom," she said, "do you think Uncle Mark would have hurt us? Really hurt us?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her no, that everything would have been fine, but I couldn't. She deserved the truth. "I think he might have," I said. "I think when people are desperate, they do things they might not normally do." And he was very desperate. She nodded like she'd already known the answer, but needed to hear me say it. "I'm glad I found that paper," she said. "I almost didn't pick it up. I almost just left it there." "I'm so glad you did," I said. "And I'm so glad you trusted your instincts and told me. You did everything right." After Emily was settled, I went back downstairs. James had started cleaning up the broken glass. We worked together in silence, sweeping and putting things back in order. There wasn't much to say. We were both processing everything that had happened. We were both dealing with the shock and the fear and the relief all mixed together. Around 2 a.m, we finally went to bed. We lay in the dark, neither of us sleeping. James reached over and took my hand. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," he said. "If Emily hadn't found that paper, if she hadn't told you, if you hadn't called." "But she did," I said. "And I did. And everyone is safe." "My brother is going to prison for a long time," James said. There was no emotion in his voice, just statement of fact. "Yes," I said. "He is." "I don't think I really knew him at all," James continued. "I thought I did. I thought I knew who he was. But I was seeing who I wanted him to be, not who he actually was. That's what he counted on, I said. That's what people like him do. They make you want to believe in them. James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Emily tried to tell us. All those times she said she didn't like him, that something felt wrong. She was right. Kids see things we don't sometimes. They're not blinded by history and obligation. I thought about that. It was true. Emily had never had the relationship with Mark that James had. She'd never known him as the charming little brother. She'd only ever known him as Uncle Mark, the guy who showed up asking for things and making her uncomfortable. She'd trusted her gut, and her gut had been right. The next few days were strange. The story made the local news. Family dinner turns into arrest of escaped prisoner. We didn't talk to reporters. We just wanted privacy. The police kept us updated on Mark's case. He was charged with the original assault, plus evading arrest, plus breaking and entering for what he'd done to my bedroom door. His bail was set extremely high. He wasn't getting out this time. James took some time off work. He needed to process everything. He called his parents, who lived in another state. They were devastated. They couldn't believe their son had been capable of violence. They asked if they could visit. James said, not yet. He needed time. Emily went back to school after missing a few days. Some of her friends had seen the news and asked questions. She didn't give them many details. She told me later that it felt weird being treated like a hero when she'd really just been terrified and trying to survive. I understood that. She hadn't been trying to be brave. She'd just been trying to keep her family safe. About a week after everything happened, a detective came by the house. He wanted to follow up on a few things. He told us that when they'd searched Mark after his arrest, they'd found items that suggested he'd been planning to ask James for at least $20,000. He had notes about how to convince James, what to say, what buttons to push. If James had hesitated or refused, the detective said, things could have turned violent quickly. Mark had been getting increasingly desperate as the days passed, and the authorities closed in on him. The detective also told us something else. Another family member had helped Mark after his escape. A cousin had given him money and let him stay in their garage for a few days. That cousin was now facing charges for aiding a fugitive. The whole extended family was falling apart over this. Some believed Mark deserved another chance. Others were horrified by what he'd done. James found himself in the middle, defending his decision to call the police while also grieving the loss of his brother. We started going to family therapy, all three of us. The therapist helped us talk through what had happened and how it had affected us. Emily talked about how she still felt scared sometimes, especially when she heard unexpected noises at night. James talked about his guilt and his grief. I talked about the moment I saw that note and had to decide whether to trust my daughter over my own perception of safety. We all had trauma from that night. We all needed help processing it. Slowly, things started to feel a little more normal. We changed the locks on all the doors. We got a security system installed, small things that made us feel safer in our own home. James repaired the bedroom door himself. He said it was therapeutic, fixing the physical damage even though the emotional damage would take longer to heal. One evening, about a month after everything happened, Emily and I were sitting together in the living room. James was working late. We were watching a movie, something light and funny to take our minds off things. During a commercial break, Emily turned to me. "Mom," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "When you got my note, did you believe me right away, or did you think I was being dramatic?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. For a split second, I wondered if maybe you were overreacting, I admitted. But then I looked at your face, and I knew you weren't. I knew you were really scared, and I decided right then that I would always trust you when you tell me something is wrong. Emily nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I almost didn't write the note. I almost convinced myself I was wrong. Who was I to say Uncle Mark was dangerous? I'm just a kid. I thought maybe I was misunderstanding what I'd found. But you didn't convince yourself of that, I said. You trusted yourself. That took courage. I was so scared, Emily said. Her voice got small. When he looked at me and I could tell he knew that I knew, I thought he might do something right then at the table. I thought he might hurt you or Dad or me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely write the note. I put my arm around her and pulled her close. You were so brave, I said. You stayed calm. You warned me without giving anything away. You probably saved all of our lives. Do you think he would have killed us? Emily asked. It was the question she'd been holding inside, the one that scared her most. I don't know, I said honestly. I hope not. I think he just wanted money. But people who are cornered and desperate can do terrible things. The important thing is that we didn't have to find out. Because of you. We sat together quietly. The movie came back on, but neither of us was really watching it anymore. I thought about that night, about the note, about the look in my daughter's eyes when she'd silently begged me to believe her. I thought about how close we'd come to a very different outcome. I thought about all the ways that night could have gone wrong, but it hadn't, because a 16-year-old girl had trusted her instincts and had the courage to act on them. James came home around 9. We told him we'd ordered pizza for dinner because neither of us had felt like cooking. He sat down with us and we finished the movie together. It was a normal evening, a quiet evening, the kind of evening we'd taken for granted before, but now felt grateful for. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, James and I talked. We sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea. This is going to sound strange, James said, but in a weird way, I'm grateful this happened. I looked at him, surprised. What do you mean? He struggled to find the words. If Mark had gotten away with it this time, he would have come back, maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years. And next time, Emily might not have found that paper. Next time, we might not have gotten warning. At least now we know the truth. At least now he can't hurt anyone else for a long time. I understood what he meant. There was a finality to this. Mark was going to prison. There would be no more chances, no more excuses, no more late-night calls asking for help. The cycle was broken. And while it had been broken in the most traumatic way possible, at least it was broken. I've been thinking a lot about second chances, James continued, about how I always believed in giving people another opportunity to do better, and I still believe in that. But I also learned that sometimes people show you who they are and you need to believe them. Mark has been showing us who he is for years. I just didn't want to see it. Emily saw it, I said gently. She did, James agreed. She tried to tell us. And from now on, when she tells us something feels wrong, I'm going to listen. Even if I don't understand why, even if it doesn't make sense to me, I'm going to trust her instincts. That felt like an important lesson for both of us. As parents, we often think we know better than our children. We think our experience and age give us wisdom they lack. But sometimes, children see things more clearly because they haven't learned to make excuses yet. They haven't learned to ignore their gut feelings in favor of social expectations or family obligations. Emily had trusted her instincts, and it had saved us. Time continued to pass. The holidays came. We decided not to do our usual big family gathering. It felt too soon. Instead, it was just the 3 of us. We made a quiet dinner and exchanged modest gifts. It was actually one of the nicest holidays we'd ever had. There was no stress, no tension, no uncomfortable relatives, just us. Emily gave me a card she'd made herself. Inside, she'd written a message. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for trusting me even when you didn't understand. I love you. I'd kept that card in my desk drawer. and looked at it whenever I needed a reminder of what's truly important. Mark's trial happened the following spring. We didn't attend. We'd given our statements to the prosecutors, and that was enough. We didn't need to see him again. The prosecutor called James after the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, 20 years minimum. James thanked him and hung up. He told me the news. We both sat with it for a while. 20 years. Mark would be an old man when he got out. Do you feel bad for him? I asked James. He thought about it. A part of me does, he said. He's still my brother, but a bigger part of me is just relieved. Relieved that he can't hurt anyone else. Relieved that our family is safe. That felt like the right answer. It was okay to feel complicated things about complicated people. It was okay to grieve the person you thought someone was, while also being glad they couldn't hurt you anymore. Emily was doing well. She'd started seeing the school counselor, which helped her process everything. Her grades stayed strong. She got accepted into a summer program for students interested in criminal justice. The whole experience had changed her, but not in a bad way. It had made her more aware, more confident in her own judgment. She'd learned that her voice mattered, that her observations were valid, that she had the power to protect herself and others. One night, almost a year after everything had happened, the three of us were having dinner together. Just a regular weeknight dinner, nothing special. Emily was telling us about her day. James was making jokes. I was clearing plates. It was so perfectly normal. And I realized that we'd made it through. We'd survived. We were okay. As I stood at the sink washing dishes, I thought about that note. Call 911. 3 words that had changed everything. 3 words written in shaky handwriting by a scared teenage girl. 3 words that had required me to make a choice. To trust or to dismiss. To act or to wait. To believe my daughter or to believe in normalcy. I thought about all the families who don't get that warning. All the times danger announces itself too late. We'd been lucky. Not just because Emily had found that paper, but because she'd known what to do with the information, because she'd trusted herself, because she'd found a way to communicate the danger without escalating it, because I'd chosen to believe her. That's what I want people to understand. Sometimes the greatest dangers don't announce themselves with a bang. They walk through your front door with a smile and a bottle of wine. They sit at your dinner table and tell charming stories. They look like people you love. And sometimes, the only warning you get is a quiet voice saying something's wrong, a child's instinct, a folded note passed under the table. The strength isn't in never facing danger. The strength is in trusting the people you love when they tell you something's wrong. It's in believing your daughter when she says, call for help, even when you don't understand why. It's in choosing to act on trust rather than wait for proof. Emily saved our family that night. But I like to think I played a part too. I chose to trust her. I chose to believe her fear was real, even when I couldn't see the threat myself. That's what parents do. We trust our children, even when they see things we don't, especially when they see things we don't. Now, a year later, our lives have moved forward. We're not the same family we were before that dinner. We're more careful. We're more aware. We pay attention to instincts and warnings in ways we didn't before. But we're also stronger. We know we can face danger and come through it. We know we can trust each other. We know that when it matters most, we'll protect each other. I still think about that moment sometimes. Sitting at the dinner table, opening that napkin, seeing those words. The ice-cold terror, the split-second decision, the choice to trust. It's a moment that will stay with me forever. But it's also a moment I'm grateful for. In a strange way, because it taught me something essential about being a mother. It's not about always knowing the right answer. It's about trusting your child when they come to you with fear, with questions, with warnings. It's about believing them when the world looks safe, especially when the world looks safe. My daughter's courage saved our family that night. Her instincts, her intelligence, her bravery, but it was the bond between us that made it possible. The trust we'd built over 16 years, the knowledge that she could come to me even in the most terrifying moment, even without words, and I would understand. I would believe, I would act. That's the story of the note under the table. The night our normal family dinner turned into something else entirely. The night we learned that danger can wear a familiar face. The night my daughter's warning saved our lives. And the night I learned that a mother's greatest strength is knowing when to trust her child's voice over her own hopes. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments below.